And so good. Well, good to have everybody here as we go into, I guess it's now session 5. And we've learned a lot of things so far. We've gone through vision and mission and why that even matters and why it's so important to have a why. And you guys have had to make phone calls to friends and do thank you things and all these things that at first blush might seem a little bit silly. But at the end of the day, these are going to be some things that whether you're here or not, I think if you take some of them and apply them to your life, it's going to be extremely fruitful, not only for you personally, just the way that you operate, but just in life as a whole. Just if, one of the things that will really help you stand out is just by having a vision for your life. Most people kind of wander and they just get frustrated because they're not quite sure where they're going. And there does take some time for you to try to nail that down, but it's good to be thinking about those things that will help you kind of know which direction. In fact, funny enough, I got an email from a student about 3 semesters ago that said because of what he just went through here, it moved him into a whole different direction. And so now he's going to become an attorney. And so it's been pretty fun to watch just what has come out of some of the students going through these exercises and applying them in their life. And so just hope you understand that this is not just so you can, maybe get a job here and maybe you will, and that would be great, but it's also just for you personally so that you can apply it in your own life and have some value. And so that's just, good for you to notate. I had you guys go through and do the innovation project, and I have to say I was like super jazzed when I watched it. I mean, I was like overwhelmed with joy when I saw what you guys went through, which was, focusing on the poor and the disenfranchised. It was like, wow, what a fantastic thing to innovate around, just because you don't really think about that a lot of times. You're like, well, you innovate around business and a widget and a product. And so when I saw this, my wife was like, why are you getting so excited on your computer? And I'm like, because I'm watching this amazing thing that these guys put together. And so I was so proud of you guys for going through that. So tell me kind of your, I mean, just even like the idea of going and coordinating with like the Phoenix Suns and, trying to figure out how you're going to, put these things together and try to make them all come together with the community. I thought was such a great idea how you incorporated a lot of the values into it and just molded that in there to, winning proactive partners and then deepening the relationships with the community. And so I just really appreciated the thought that you guys put into like weaving in the value system within what it is that we're trying to do to have that kind of impact. And I'll tell you why it touched me so much. We started a nonprofit organization a couple of years ago called h3phoenix.com. You can go there sometime, but it's essentially a nonprofit organization that's designed to develop servant leaders, people that go out into the community and have an attitude of pouring out to one another in the community around us, essentially. And so we've been able to fundraise. In fact, this year we raised about $75,000 for a community in East Valley that deals with foster kids. And so we were able to do this specifically for counseling for them because they didn't have the money to go to counseling. They've gone through a lot of trauma. And so, what I visioned for the people, and this is why this is so funny you guys did this, but I did a study to try to figure out how many homeless people there are in that have no home at all. Okay, so there's a distinction. So no home at all in the whole world. Okay, that was my first study that I did. It was 150 million people, okay, have no homes at all, so no shelter. And then I did a study and I said, well, how many people have inadequate shelter. And you guys are going to be blown away by this. It's 1.6 billion people have inadequate shelter. So think about that for just a minute, okay? Now, put that in context for how many people there are in the world. There's almost 8 billion people, okay? So you start doing the math, you get pretty close to 20% of the population almost is inadequate shelter, okay? So it just blows your mind when you think about it for a minute. And then I did a study and I said, well, we have lots of shelters, right? Like we're not really short of people wanting to help people. So it's like, how many people actually serve people within the whole world? Meaning like, how many people are actually like engaged to some level of degree where they would go out at least once a year and do something to think about somebody else, right? And it's literally 86% of the world's population does zero to do anything for anybody outside of, their sort of own sphere, right? That blew my mind. I was like, I thought it was like, the problem is it's what I called apathy. Okay. So we have a very apathetic sort of concept. And so what we started laying out was a vision, which is a global vision to move people's hearts from apathy to empathy. And so we're working on a global vision right now to move people out of this place of apathy, where you drive down the street and you see the guy or the gal and the homeless on the corner and you're just kind of apathetic to it. You might even be annoyed of it because it's just kind of like, gosh, this is obnoxious, and yet you're not going to do anything, right? So we're just kind of going this whole thing. So when you guys did that, it literally just ignited my heart. And so I just want to encourage you guys, and I'll obviously give you some feedback and go back through and give you some specifics, but I just want to say, like, great job. I love that. Love the heart behind it. So I just want to hear from you guys. Like, tell me what that was like for you, or just any thoughts you have around it, because it just really excited me personally. So I'll just leave it open.
I can start. So when we were creating, so we kind of pitched in our different ideas, and I think this was a good one that we settled on. But like I said, I've always kind of been like from the very beginning fond of like volunteering with kids, especially like foster care system and stuff. So that's what I did my idea based on. For my presentation, it was relating to just getting people, like you said, counseling and education system. I feel like people don't realize how important it is for those type of kids, especially. I personally feel like they become the most intelligent because they work hard for it. They know how hard they've had to come to that point. So it was I think we researched specifically in the Phoenix area because the whole US is really big and we couldn't focus on that. So starting off, when I learned, it was like, I think it was 15%, around like a 250,000 ratio, like of just kids. I was mind blown. I was like, it's in that city only, like there's so many kids without like homes and no education. So I looked up the nonprofit organizations that like deal with the kids in that surrounding. So I was like, I was like thankful for, first of all, for the life that I'm in. And second, I just wanted to do something for the kids. And it just made me really want to, like, obviously, since I live in Texas, I live in Houston, it made me want to like focus over here, look at the kids over here, and maybe like go out and do more for them. Maybe work in like, or maybe like volunteer with those type of nonprofits that help over here so I can get the kids on the right path to get towards the education part of their life. So, in a feeling wise, it definitely made me like see things from different perspective, because I think when you look at numbers, that's when you realize, oh, this is real. When you just see people on the streets, I think sometimes, like even when I'm with people and we'll bring up the poor, they'll be like, oh, that's their choice. Like at times people don't realize it's not always their choice, it's the circumstance that can change their life.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Just think about the power of you just going through the small exercise to like walk through and get educated about it. And then, as Michelle says so well in here, she says, we want to give people their heart back, meaning that we want people to kind of gain a heart towards people to, because it's really easy for me. I'm guilty of this just as much, of like dehumanizing people. You're just kind of, and you just kind of move on. And so just to have that, heart to kind of go, oh gosh, I really want to help these people, and to just see the impact that can have just through a small little thing is just super powerful. And in fact, Michelle did this whole company-wide thing where we had to go out and hand a code out to somebody. And I remember I took my son, we went out on a Saturday, and I remember I was so convicted because we had to write what our experience was. And I was so convicted because I was like annoyed that I had to park my car and like walk down and give this guy the code. And so I shared that with my experience. I was so convicted. I'm like, I was so like inconvenienced, and I was like, that was just so funny how we get so comfortable. And yet I was able to talk with him for a while and just, hear his story. And you're right. Like once we did this for about 3 years, every month we go down and hand donuts out to the homeless, kind of talk with them. And it was so funny because you really get to hear people's story, and you get to really learn like, wow, that's amazing to me that, you're even here given what you went through. So thanks for sharing that. It's awesome. What else? Anybody else? What was your experience going through this?
Yeah, I can go. I know like the overall arching theme that we really wanted to portray was just passion. So I know reading the overall, like what we were supposed to do for the project, it was to find something that kind of frustrates us in our life. And it was supposed to be from the business aspect. And we were shooting ideas at each other. Some were business, some were, passion filled and personal. But when we came upon this idea and we all kind of came up with our own events that really meant something to us, I feel like it really drove us to have a much better purpose for what we were doing. And the idea of connecting the corporation also with the passion we had for helping the poor and disenfranchised, I think was just a recipe for us to do really, really well. And I think everybody's event was very unique, and it was different from one another. So it all contributed to a different aspect of the project overall.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love the concept of just passion, because, that is a necessary thing to drive innovation. Sometimes we feel frustration and we just want to like suppress it. It's like, you're not supposed to feel frustrated. I'm like, yeah, you are. And when you are, like, it's not meant to just be ignored, like do something about it. Not that you can in every situation, but there's some level of the goodness of frustration that should drive you to move. That's how Uber happened. These guys were annoyed, as they went waiting for a cab, and so eventually they took that frustration and came up with Uber, right? So just, that frustration can be your friend if it's harnessed appropriately. So I love the passion behind that. What else? Maybe one more of you before we move on.
Yeah, I can go. So just like what Joey was saying, we were just all shooting ideas, and whenever we came on the consensus that we'll focus on helping the poor and disenfranchised, I like how everyone already kind of had like their own history behind helping someone, whether it was Suha with children, and Joey with his circumstance with the Phoenix Suns. I thought that was super cool how we all kind of connected our own kind of history and put it towards presenting this idea to innovate and help out those that are less fortunate, which I thought was super good. And it gave us all the more fuel to do it because we were just like so passionate about it. I mean, my thing was teaching English to people that don't know English, and so that's something that I've had a little bit of history about, and I thought that everyone was unique in their own way, but it was all interconnected, which I thought was super, super cool.
Yeah. Well, I love it, guys. I'll give you some responses over the next couple of days, but just super proud of you. Great job. And hope you take something away with that this should become part of your life, for just taking the frustrations and being innovative wherever you end up, whether it's here or somewhere else. Just always be at a place where you feel like you have the autonomy to take frustrations and innovate. It's really important. And it's when you get to have fun too, get to mess around and try new things. So tell me what stood out about the industry. What did you learn? For those of you who've had a chance to dive in, if you haven't, that's okay too, and we can chat through a little bit. But anything stand out to you about the industry, whether it was the statistics, whether it was, you know, some of the economics, whether it was concerns? But I'd love to just hear from some of you guys about what you learned so far.
I can
I know.
go. Oh,
Oh,
you can.
so go ahead.
Thank you. I was gonna say I can go, but I think the one thing that stood out to me were the numbers. They were like in the trillions, the billions, and it was like the stats. When I was reading the MBA PDF, I at first I didn't know what I was reading, honestly. I was so confused at what I was looking at, but as I got in more on this side, I was also searching what like the big words were, what each word was, but definitely I think something that stood out were the numbers and how they correlate with the vocab that was given. Like, oh, this is this, and then over the rate, this goes up this much. So I think that was very fascinating to me. I mean, you always, like I said, you always know how big the industry is, but when you get to the numbers, you're like, wow, that's huge.
It's big. It's a big industry. It's very interconnected with everything almost in the GDP. And so it's going to be around for a long time. So yeah, good concepts. What else?
I know something that really interested me was the life insurance companies, how they invest your money in commercial real estate. I had no idea that that was something that was even possible or something that even I could fathom at the time. And I did a lot of background research while I was doing the assignment and watching the video for it. And I just found that like extremely interesting and like peculiar that they really heavily invest in that section of the economy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of people are pretty blown away at that. They're like, I didn't know life insurance companies and Allstate and State Farm and Geico and all these companies. I'm doing a loan right now with Protective Life, Standard Life. All these companies take a portion of the money that they receive in premiums and they invest it in commercial mortgages. So yeah, so it's a fun thing to get to be a part of. So what else? Anybody else have any other thoughts before I start taking over here?
Yeah, I was gonna say that something that interested me. I mean, I've just started looking at lesson 2 here, so kind of new to it, but I did find it interesting how like the oil barons and farmers account for so much of the acreage in this country. I thought that was fascinating. I think it was like 1.6 trillion or something, or 85% of the land. So I didn't know it was quite that severe, but yeah, that really interested me. And then I didn't know how I didn't I was surprised at how big of an industry there was for outstanding loans. I did not know it was in the trillions.
It's a massive industry. We are run on debt.
Right.
You know, I think it's good debt, but it's debt nonetheless. And so there's this concept of leverage that allows people to get into assets that are larger and build wealth. And so it's a big industry. It's something that obviously has so many different avenues and complexities and spin-offs and things like that. So it's important to understand it because, you know, when you're trying to make a decision in a career you're going, one of the things you're going to do, kind of like when I'm looking at different businesses to buy or avenues to go after, I always look at the size of the market and, you know, where is the wave, you know, because I'm just trying to get on a wave when I'm making a decision, because, you know, you're either going with the wave or against the wave, but you're on a wave. And so this is a big wave that is not going away. So there was a couple of things, and maybe you haven't gotten into it, but we are going to talk about it today, just for the sake of continuing to progress. So commercial banks, did you guys, any of you guys have a chance to go through some of the commercial banking stuff yet? If not, we're still going to chat about it today. Okay. So let me just kind of walk you through a bank. So you guys walk in and you put your, you know, your big bucks, because you're all in college making a ton of money, and you put your money in the bank. Okay. And so a bank is set up as this kind of FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and they'll go through this whole charter. And what they're doing is they're going to take all your deposits. An easy way to think about it is that you're investing money with the bank and they are paying you very little if you haven't figured that out yet. Right now it's higher just because the interest rates have gone up so much, but you're still not making a lot of money. And what they're doing is they're taking that money, and then what they have to do is they have all these regulatory things, and they're going to take that dollar that you give them, and then they have to take a portion of that and put it aside for any defaults that happen, but they're going to lend the rest of that money out. And they're going to go out to small businesses because most banks are predominantly looking to work within their local community to look for small business owners that they can lend money to so that they can make money on the money they just got. Okay. And so they're going to pay you and me about, who knows, 10 cents, or 0.001% on our money. And then they're going to go lend it out at 7.5. Okay. So there's a pretty big margin there that takes place. Now, what you have to remember is that they have infrastructure. Have you ever walked into a bank? They got a big fancy office and desks and all these pens and everything you can imagine that they have, right? All this stuff costs money and they have to pay for all the employees and everything else. So then they end up having a cost of funds. So what happens is even though they pay you 0.001, their cost of funds might be somewhere in the, 2.5%. Okay. So that's just their cost. And then what happens is they're going to add a spread on top of that so they can have a margin that they make above their cost of funds. And that's what's called the spread. So they might charge 3% or 3.00 over the cost of funds. And so they get to an all-in rate. Okay. Now, banks will use indexes as their cost of funds. So they might use Prime. Are you guys familiar with Prime, Wall Street Journal Prime? So the Wall Street Journal Prime rate right now is 7.5%. Just to give you an idea, at one point it was like down at, it was like, 1.5, and now went all the way up to 7.5. So that's welcome to inflation, so that's what happens is you start ratcheting this thing up to try to slow down the money supply. So anyway, so it's 7.5%, right? So all of a sudden this money is getting expensive that they're having to lend out to people. So they lend the money at X, you and I get Y, and then they make this yield, and that's their profit that they make. Okay. And so they go ahead and they will send out these people that are business development officers who go knocking on doors and meeting with people and small business owners to say, hey, we want your deposits, but we want to lend you money. Now, why do you think that they want to go get small business owners as opposed to just lending money to investors that are buying retail centers? Not that they don't, but why do you think they want to lend money to small business owners as their primary people that they are going to lend money to? What do you think? Any ideas?
Perhaps it's to help grow the community that they are trying to serve.
Yeah, that's absolutely part of it. Part of it is that they have a obligation to lend money and to invest in the community. So they actually have, there's a section, they actually are called CRA. So they actually have to do Community Reinvestment Act. They actually have to go into low income areas and they need to invest X amount of dollars in it. And so that's a mandate for sure. So part of it is that for sure, they want to invest in the community. What else? What are the reasons why do you think that they want to lend to the small business owner as opposed to just the investor who is going to buy a retail center or apartment complex or whatever?
Would it be because the small business is a little more volatile in terms of, there's a higher chance that they either don't work out or they do work out, but there's a better chance that they can kind of make money on that business?
Absolutely. You're hitting the nail on the head. The reason why they'd rather lend money to the small business owner, and I want you to think about the logic, It works out in the math, but just think about the logic for a minute. If you and I own a business, it's our livelihood, right? Like, you know, if you own an investment property, maybe it's your livelihood, but chances are you're just doing it on the side, or, you know, it's not as big of a deal. But if you're running a business, you got employees, you got a 401k, maybe you're doing all these things. So there's a lot riding on the line here. And so you have a ton riding on this, your livelihood, right? So the chances of you defaulting goes down dramatically on your business loans and real estate loans as a small business owner than if you're an investor in a property, because you're like, well, if I lose the property, it's a bummer, I don't want that. But, you know, as opposed to your own business, it's a really big deal. So that's one of the major reasons why banks go after small business owners. Okay. The second reason why is, you know, deposits. Okay. So they go out and they're going to get money, and guess where they're gonna have to deposit it? In the bank, right? So they go sell, and then the money comes in and goes through the bank. And so that they get your deposits, they get to do what? Go lend more money out. And so the cycle goes around and around and around. And so this is how the bank works and how they function. And if you walk into any bank today, this is exactly what you're going to hear. I even test you guys to do this. Call a commercial bank and say, what do you guys focus on and why? And this is what you're going to hear. We're a relationship bank. You know, this is what they say. We want to build a relationship with you, and da 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 da. Okay, they say that every time. And the reason they say that is what they're saying to you is, I want your money. Because you say, well, good, let's just hang out. And be like, no, I don't want that. I want your money. And so that's what that means when they say we're a relationship bank. They want the money so they can have a relationship with you around the money. But what they're doing is they're taking the money in, they're having it as deposits, and then they're going to go ahead and lend it out. Okay. And they have to go through this whole process. And so banking is a little bit, in my opinion, it's kind of archaic, it's slow, and they're collecting all this documentation because guess what? They're really, at the end of the day, it's a government run entity. Now, why do you think I say that? You're like, no, it's not, it's a bank. But why do you think I said it's a government run entity at the end of the day?
Well, I think after 2009, didn't the Fed change some of the policies where they bought some private assets or something like of the sort? So realistically, with the FDIC, they can't really fail anymore.
Yeah, it's the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. So they became so regulated. Okay.
Right.
All these regulatory items in the bank system that it's just covered with red tape. I mean, they're so audited, and they have to literally hire so many people just to do an audit because it's so intensive. And so when they do it, there's just red tape after red tape after red tape. And so when you go get a loan, they're asking for so much information, especially when you do an SBA loan. It's really government oriented because it's backed by the federal government. So there's just tons and tons of paperwork that you have to go through. Now they accomplish things. I mean, most loans wouldn't get done if it wasn't for the SBA. So I'm not saying that as a negative thing. I'm just saying that's what it is. You're dealing with a lot of paperwork, a lot of red tape, and so that people can get loans because of these SBA loans. And so what happens is you have to go through, get personal financial statements, tax returns, bank statements, fill out their application. I mean, there's so much information they need. Then they take it into a committee, okay, that goes ahead and reviews it. And then you have to present it to the committee. Then they have to come back and either you're approved or not, or they change something. So by the time you're done, it probably takes about 75 to 80 days to close a loan. Okay. It's a long time. But that's how banks do. Now they're going to give you the cheapest money than anybody else, generally speaking, but it is a long period of time to go through it because they're really careful and they don't want to lose people's money. Because guess what? Your deposits are in there. And it's backed by the FDIC. They say that if you put money in there, they will guarantee up to $250,000. Okay. So that's why you don't see people making the run on the bank, right? They have the backed by the federal government. So that's kind of how the banking system works. And banks, if you see, they probably do about 38% of the total amount of commercial loans in the whole country. That's a lot. And they're very, very active because they do a lot of construction and they do a lot of larger loans. And so, and you have different sizes of banks. You have like the Wells Fargo of the world, B of A, Chase, right? They call those money center banks. Are huge, right? Then you have what's called middle market banks, which might be sort of like, you know, regional players that might be, you know, in 6 or 7 or 8 different states. So they're pretty decent size. And then you start getting down into these smaller banks that might have a couple of branches. And so they're going to have to be a little bit more competitive or take more risk, because the Wells Fargos of the world are going to take less risk, but they have the best rates. Okay. But the small banks are saying, well, we can't be as competitive as Wells Fargo. So we're going to have to deal with the one that has a little nips and cracks and different things wrong with it because we're going to have to charge higher. So thoughts, questions around that? Might be a lot to take in, but I just try to give you an overview on how a bank functions. Okay. Pretty exciting stuff. So when you go into the bank, just realize that's how it works. Okay. And we've dealt with banks many, many times. We have almost completely moved away from banks just because they're very slow, and that's just not our model. And so we don't deal with banks that much anymore, and we won't be as we go forward, because they're just becoming more and more difficult to work with, and that's just not our model. At the end of the day, it's unpredictable whether you get something done or not. Okay, so the next one is life insurance companies. You know, life insurance companies. Again, who's your insurance companies? What are some of your insurance companies you guys deal with? Have you dealt with like a Geico or a State Farm, or who else? Maybe you don't even know. Maybe you guys don't have any insurance.
I don't know about anybody else, but I'm State Farm.
So State Farm, they're
I
huge.
think we're Geico.
Yep,
I've heard yeah.
Yep, I'm Geico as well. So I got the little green lizard. So these guys, so there's big insurance companies. Okay, they literally have billions and billions of dollars. Okay, that comes flowing in from all over, people paying their premiums. Okay. And so they get all these premiums in every month. You know, Northwestern, Mutual, and all these companies, Mutual of Omaha. You're going to see these all over now, wherever you see these big life insurance companies, Assurity. They take all these premiums in, and then they're going to go ahead, and there's this little department. It's kind of crazy. They have this little department with the chief investment officer. And the chief investment officer and his team, or her team, they kind of, their job is to say, well, what are we going to do with all this money? And their job is to be a portfolio manager. And so they're going to go ahead and invest this money in different areas. They're going to go buy bonds. They might buy some types of stocks, and they might, go over here and get some commodities or something. And so then they'll take a small portion of that and say, and they're very risk adverse. Okay, they don't like a lot of risk. But when they do invest the money, they just want to invest it and put it to bed and be done with it. And they just want it to pay out over a long period of time. So what they'll do in the commercial mortgages is they'll come out to, and the way they distribute the money, because they're not a lender, okay, most of these groups aren't a lender, is they will call people like us or other firms, and they'll say, hey, you know the market and you know this industry and you're going to service the loan, okay? But we're going to work through you, correspondent, and we want you to find the opportunities, vet out the opportunities. We will fund it in-house, but you're going to service the loan for us, okay? Because we want you to go do the inspections. We want you to kick the tires. We want you to know the borrowers, and we will invest the money through your company, okay? And so that's the way they distribute the money, is they'll work through these correspondents. So the normal person can't walk off the street and go get a loan with the life company. They have to go through companies that are correspondents, okay, in the local firms that have exclusive representation for that bucket of money. And then they'll go out and distribute it and lend out the money to all these different companies. Now, life insurance companies predominantly do not deal with small business owners. They deal with larger investment properties, okay? So you're gonna have to memorize this at some point, but I call it the 4 food groups. Okay, so office, retail, industrial, multifamily. Those are the 4 food groups: office, retail, industrial, multifamily, okay? Those are the 4 buckets that they focus on. Okay, now it's quite honestly, it's only 3 right now because a lot of people don't want to lend on office. Do you have any reason why?
Because there's kind of been a big switch to work from home recently.
Yes, people are very, very leery of office right now, rightly so, because people just have flexibility to work. We're all hanging out on Zoom, right? And so, they're just more focused on retail, industrial. They love industrial right now. It's a hot product. Warehouse, distribution facilities, think about Amazon, Retail depends, right? Remember the old malls that you used to go to, right? Those are becoming less and less popular. And you just have more localized kind of retail shops. If you and I were going to go through and get our coffee or whatever, you're going to go through Dutch Brothers or Starbucks, right? Those things are very well received, or whatever the local thing is. And then you have apartment complexes. Chances are you guys are in an apartment, right? And so they'll lend against apartments. So those are kind of the assets that they will lend the money against. So I'm going to keep talking about it, but I want to hit the pause button to see if you guys have comments or questions.
So why exactly do they have to go through a medium, really? Like a financial intermediary? Is it just knowledge?
They can, and I'm not saying that everyone does that. But I would say the reason why most of them do is a couple of reasons. They're not in the business of setting up a mortgage shop. They're in the business of investing money. And so they just look at it and say, look, you know the industry, you have the contacts, you are the one that's going to go ahead and go kick tires and do all this stuff. We just want you to do it, and we'll invest the money and we'll have the loan documents. But at the end of the day, that's just not the business we're in. We're in the business of taking money and investing. And so we're not going to set up a company to do it. And so that's kind of the reason why they'll do that, if that makes sense. Yeah, great question. Any other questions before I unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, I have a question. As a life insurance company, why would you invest your money in an industrial complex rather than a multifamily complex when a multifamily complex creates more cash flow?
Well, it depends. It's a great question. It's not exactly accurate. I mean, a lot of time it depends. I mean, there's many industrial properties that will make more money. And it's predominantly because apartments are, let me put it this way. In the grand scheme of things, if I'm putting this on a risk spectrum for a minute, apartment complexes would be considered the lowest risk investment, okay? And the reason why is, come heck or high water, people need a place to live. Does that make sense? I mean, they're just, and all you have to do is make some adjustments on the price, and chances are you're going to lease up the facility, unless you're just in the major ghetto and it's just a really bad area, right? But for the most part, you're going to lease the place up, Okay. And so ultimately, those are just very low risk investments. Okay. Now, which means that it doesn't necessarily have the highest return, because it's not as risky, which you're not, those are always kind of, remember, always risk and return, risk and return. So higher risk, higher return, lower risk, lower return, right? Go get a treasury, it's lower risk, lower return. Industrial, it depends. So like if you're this old, maybe rundown multi-tenant industrial building where you have some class C tenants or something like that, you might have a higher return than you do on an apartment complex because you just have more risk. And so versus if you went down and you had like a big box industrial, huge tenant. I'm doing one right now that is, they bought GE Appliances. It's over in Charleston, South Carolina. It's a $50 million deal. And, you know, that's a lower cap rate or lower return because it's a huge tenant, lower risk, okay, versus the apartment complex. So it sort of depends. That's why I said it, maybe, maybe not. And then you get into office, again, office way high risk. It's going to be higher return. Retail, it depends. If I'm talking about Starbucks, probably lower return because you just have a no-brainer. They're probably going to do well. Walgreens, right? It's a credit tenant. And so it's lower return, but guaranteed you're probably going to get paid. I mean, I've met guys that have bought a vacant Walgreens and they've been vacant for 10 years. But guess what they get every month in the mail? A check. You know, they just make their payment because it's a credit rated tenant, so to speak. So does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much.
Great comment. So life companies, they lend to these types of deals and they're going to be lower on the loan to value. So like 60 to 65% right now, loan to value. So if your purchase price was $1 million, they'd lend you 650. Tracking with me? So they're going to be lower versus a bank might go higher, but they're going to be lower because they're lower risk. And they're going to do a 30-year amortization or 25 to 30-year amortization fixed for 10 years. Okay. And so they want to fix it. So do you guys understand the distinction between an amortization and a term? Because amortization means this is the period of time they're going to calculate your payments. So if you guys get a chance, I would encourage you to do this so it'll help you because a lot of times it gets tricky. Go find an amortization calculator online and play around with it. Put in different numbers, put in different rates, and you'll see what happens when you change the amortization from 30 to 25 to 10. The payments go up, right? As the amortization goes down, you're shrinking the payment schedule. Versus if you're lengthening the payment schedule on an amortization, okay? And so they do a longer amortization, but they do a shorter term. It means the loan is going to balloon and come due in 10 years. So if it comes due in 10 years, you're like, wait a minute, I'm gonna have to pay him that big check? And the answer is no, you could, but you're just gonna refinance the loan. Does that make sense? You're just gonna go get another loan with somebody else. Or they're going to renew you to go another 10. But the reason they do that is it lowers their risk. I don't know why, but they basically say, okay, in the 10th year, you got to make sure you're doing things right because you're going to have to pay me off. Okay. So that's the concept behind it. And banks do the same thing. They only usually go 5. They like to do shorter periods of time. Now, the other reason why is because if all of a sudden you're at 5% interest rate and you did it for 5 years and 5 years comes up, and let's say you'd fixed it for 10 and 5 years comes up and the corresponding rates in the market are 6, what's happening to the money that you lent? What do you think? You're at 5, the market's at 6. So guess what? You're technically losing money, right? Does that make sense? If I'm lending you money at 5%, but I could be getting 6%, then I have what is considered an economic loss. You tracking with me on that? Does that make sense? So I could be making 6, but I'm locked in at 5% at the end of the day. So if my term comes up, then I get to renew at the higher rate. I hope I didn't lose all of you guys on that one. Does that make sense? Or just raise your hand if you're like, you are nuts, Dave. I have no idea what you just said.
I think I got most of it, but that last part is where you lost me.
Okay. So so let's just use a scenario as we kind of lay on the plane here. So I'm gonna I lend so let's just say, Juan, that you came to me and you said I need to borrow some money. And I say, great, here's $100,000 and I'm gonna lien your piece of real estate. Okay, so I just gave you a deed of trust against your piece of real estate and I lent you 100 grand. And I said, okay, you're gonna pay me, the payments are gonna be over a 10-year period. Okay. So the payment schedule based on how I calculated at 5% is based on 10 years. So you go put that in an amortization calculator and you figure out, okay, it's $100 a month. And you're making that, but I said, but Juan, the loan is due. You need to pay me off in 5 years. Okay. So when we get to 5 years, whatever is remaining, you're going to have to cut me a check or you're going to have to go refinance it with somebody else because I want to be out in 5 years. Okay. Tracking with me so far? So I just lent you the money at 5%. Okay. And now in 3 years, I'm keeping track of the market, all the other lending that's going on around me. And I'm noticing that every other person that's lending people like Juan money is making 6% on their money. Tracking with me? And how much am I making off of you?
5%.
Okay, so I'm losing technically, not like physically I'm losing money, but I'm losing money economically, meaning that economic loss is I should be making 6, I'm only actually making 5. So that's why I call it an economic loss. It's the same thing if you rent an apartment complex and you're paying $700 that you locked in 7 months ago, and your neighbor is paying $800, and the landlord is saying, well, crap, I'm only getting $700 from Juan, but I could be making $800 if that lease renews, right? Because of inflation and prices have gone higher. And so that's why it's technically a loss, not in the physical sense, it's economic. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense now. So I would be benefiting off of it, but the lender won't necessarily be. Gotcha.
100%. You're benefiting, the lender's technically losing. And then what happens is if the loan comes due, it might be to the detriment of the lender because rates might be down at 3. And so you're like, well, hey, you either refinance me at 3 or I'm going to go down the street, right? And the lender's in the business of wanting to keep loans on the books, not lose them. So they may go, hey, yeah, of course I'll do that, right? So that's where that kind of negotiation comes in when it comes to interest rates at the end of the day. Now, life insurance companies will fix the rate, usually longer, and they have this prepayment penalty. Do you guys know what a prepayment penalty is? Do you know what that means?
Isn't it like sorry.
Go ahead.
Isn't it essentially like a deposit you have to put down before they even can give you the money to loan?
Nice shot. It's not quite. Let me explain it to you. So let's say, Joey, that I lent you some money. Okay. You guys are going to get off the phone and go, man, this wants to lend us a lot of money here. So I lend you some money and I give you $100,000. And I say to you, Joey, I'm going to lend this money to you, but I don't want you to pay me back too fast. Okay, because I just want the money to be out. I want to make my money. I just want to put it to bed. I don't want to have to go take it back and lend it out again. Okay. So, and it takes a lot of work to do it. So I'm going to say to you, Joey, if you pay me back before 5 years, then you're going to pay me a penalty. And the penalty might be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that means if you pay me off in the first year, you're going to pay me 5% of the loan amount as a fee. If you pay me in the second year, it's 4%. Third year, it's 3%. Fourth year, it's 2%. Fifth year, it's 1%, right? So what happens is I'm trying to de-incentivize you guys from paying me back because I want to keep the loan out as long as possible. Does that make sense? Okay. And you go, why the heck would anybody ever do that? Well, it's somewhat normative, number one. Number two is because they don't want to have to go re-lend it out. It's a lot of work and it costs a lot of money to go redo it again. And it's a pain in the behind, right? So that's kind of why they do that. And so life companies take it to the next level. They say, here's how this is going to work. And with this, we'll land the plane. If I lend you the money at 5% for 10 years, Joey, and all of a sudden in 5 years, you call me up and say, David, someone's going to pay me like $5 million for this place. And, you know, I bought it for 2. So I'm getting out of it. And I say, that's fine. And 5 years is up. And what the life company has a prepay that looks like this. They say, well, I lent it to you at 5%. And then if you want to pay me off, how many years is left? So if I gave a 10-year term and you pay me off in 5, how many years is left? 5 years.
Right.
So you got 5 years left on the loan. So as the life company, I'm going to go look at the 5-year treasury. Okay, that's how many years left. I'm going to look at the treasury market. And I'm going to say, I'm going to have to lend this money out. I'm going to have to put this money back in the treasuries. And they look at the treasury market and they say, I'm only going to make 2% on this 5-year treasury. So how much are they losing technically? They lend it to you at 5, and now they're going to have to put it out at what? 2. So they're losing what? 3%
a year, right?
3% a year, right? And so what they're going to do to you is they're going to say, hey, Joey, you can pay me off, but here's how this is going to work, buddy. You're going to pay me the 3% per year for the next 5 years against whatever your outstanding balance is. That's the amount of your prepayment penalty. So start doing the math. You take 3% multiplied by $1 million. How much is that? What do you guys think?
30 grand, isn't it?
30 grand. And then multiply that by how many years?
5 years. Yeah.
It's a lot of dough.
Yeah.
Right? So they're trying to make it so that they call it a make whole provision. So they want to be made whole of how much they would have made if they would have stayed in the loan. Okay. That's what life companies do. All right. So a lot to take in. I know this, it's